Hello, everyone. Kevin Shipp again coming to you from somewhere deep in the southern United States at the Ascent Studios. This will be part 4 of the breakdown of the shadow government. And I've broken these down into about 20-30 minute segments so you all can view these in a short period of time versus a 3-hour lecture that I've given and is also posted on this YouTube channel. And also, this is a good opportunity for friends and family who don't understand that we're living in our post-constitutional government, and the first step in gaining our freedoms back is education and spreading the word. There are people who actually think that we're still under a constitutional government, and they don't seem to, or at least in their own minds so far, they don't think it's a problem that the government is reading their emails, their texts, their pocket letter, credit card transactions, and things like that. What they have to realize is that this is a serious breach of the U.S. Constitution and essentially makes the Constitution invalid based on what they're doing. My mission, having come from the belly of the beast, the CIA, is to bring these things out and expose them in a documented, evidentiary way so people can see it for themselves. I do this not to be just a talking head, but I'm going to put some slides up because I try to teach and speak in kind of multi-channel learning. So I don't want you to sit there and just watch me as a talking head. I want you to see the slides yourself, and I think you'll learn a lot quicker, and this stuff will kind of be logged in your memory a little bit better. So that's the idea behind this. As always, I say I'm a recovering CIA officer. You know, you come out as a Fed when you've spent 17 years there in almost every directorate and in overseas operations. And it takes you a couple of years to get that stuff out of your head. You get in there and by about your 4th or 5th year, your head starts to swell up so your hat doesn't fit. And that's part of the problem, because when people get full of themselves, they start doing stupid things or illegal things, which, of course, the agency has done. There are many, many good people in the lower echelons of the CIA that are good, patriotic, God-fearing, country-loving people. And they're just working to support their families. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I still have friends in there, very close friends in there that are working now. Granted, morale is terrible from what I hear. But they're good people. They're good, patriotic people. And so we're not talking about them. We're talking about the upper levels of the CIA that are engaging in criminal activity, even as we see now in the soft coup in Washington, because of the CIA's roots going all the way back to 1947 and beyond, with no restrictions on its covert operations and spending of the millions in its secret budgets annually. So let's get into the lecture here so that everybody can see this. I'm going to bring the slides up, and so you all can see what is going on here. Let me shoot them up just a second. You got to move around. Apologize for that. Okay, stand by. All right, here we go. This is going to be part 4 of this series, and there will be several more parts coming, but this one is going to be interesting. We're going to move from the CIA to the National Security Agency, the NSA. My good friend Bill Binney has talked in detail about the NSA's violations of the Constitution, which have not changed despite claims of reform. And I think it was Ron Paul who said, whenever the government says that it's going to reform something, that's when you really need to be concerned. They never reform anything. They just change the wording. The NSA is still doing today what it did even before 9/11. People don't realize the NSA was collecting data on U.S. citizens before 9/11 happened. The Patriot Act just wrote that into law. And the guts of the Patriot Act was written by none other than Joe Biden about 10 years earlier, just waiting to be implemented. It was stuck into the Patriot Act. And then we had the massive domestic surveillance program. So let's talk a little bit about that. I always mention that the shadow government and the deep state are not one and the same thing. The shadow government is run by the unbridled power of unconstitutional secrecy. The deep state is the system behind government, the military-industrial complex, which operates largely from money and greed, corruption, and benefits from war. It is not for peace. It never will be for peace. It would drive it out of business. So let's talk about this, the National Security Agency, the eyes and the ears of the shadow government. It's a massive system of global surveillance. It is a juggernaut and is spying on every country, every city in the entire world. And now we find out that it's spying on US citizens with impunity also. The NSA is storing our information on us, US citizens, 1.5 billion pieces of information a day on us, on US citizens. And the data is so huge, they had to come up with a new name called yottabytes, which is a huge, massive storage facility. It's called the Utah Data Center in Utah, where it stores all this information on you and me. Now some people may say and do say, well, I've got nothing to hide, so why should I be worried? Well, as the government erodes the Constitution, your personal freedoms are eroding as well. So this is a serious issue, and you need to be concerned about it. We all have to cross that line when we realize that even though we're honest citizens, this stuff is being used against us. And if they want to tighten down, all they have to do is go in and dig out the data on an American person and for targeting. So be careful with that. Yottabytes is enough bits and bytes to fill the entire state of Delaware, byte to bit together, fill the entire state with bits and bytes. That's how big the Utah Data Center is. The cooling systems that cool the computers in that data system are the size of warehouses. To cool just one computer, there's several cooling warehouses that cool the massive NSA computers while they're operating. Just shows you the size of those monsters. Of course, they've got the exclusive authority to collect and unmask Americans. There is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act court, which is essentially a secret Supreme Court. The subject is not allowed to face his witnesses, state his case, or hear his or her charges. They are the FISA court, we've seen the FBI abuse this recently. The FISA court issues a warrant for NSA surveillance on that person without the person even knowing it. There's no habeas corpus. There's no right to hear the accusations against that person. It's all done in secret, essentially. It's a secret Supreme Court. Now, the new legislation, we're talking about reform, new legislation has come out and given the NSA exclusive cybersecurity authority over the United States and beyond. What that means is if the NSA considers a cyber threat, a cyber intrusion, or suspected cyber involvement, then it can, again, monitor, collect, and surveil any U.S. citizen that it deems is involved in some sort of cyber activity like this. So they just expanded the power right under Americans' noses, again, giving NSA cybersecurity authority. That's a broad term. They can just pretty much pick and choose who they want to surveil. The CIA and the NSA, as I mentioned in part 3, are shielded by the tyrannical state's secrets privilege. That is the privilege of executive branch agencies to shut down any case against them, seal all the evidence, and threaten the persons filing the suit with prison if they talk about that evidence with anyone. I talk about that in detail in another speech and in the 3-hour speech I give. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. This happened in the case of NSA surveillance. A group filed a suit against the NSA demanding information on NSA surveillance and how it was surveilling American citizens and how much. What the NSA did, of course, was invoke the state's secrets privilege, shut the case down, and seal all evidence of their involvement in domestic surveillance. That's the power, that's the tyranny that the shadow government or secret government has. In this case, the NSA. It started off as what was called the Black Vault back in World War II. And the Black Vault was involved in collecting information on foreign governments that were hostile to the United States. That is the proper reason for the existence of the National Security Agency. Foreign surveillance to protect United States security, but it is no longer that. It is now a system that has been built and developed, much like the CIA, with secret funding and budgets, and grown into a behemoth, and it's just like the CIA, an international juggernaut, spending millions, sometimes billions of dollars on programs that we now know, some of which are aimed directly at you and I. This is the Utah Data Center, a massive facility, costs several $billion to build this facility way out in the desert of Utah. And this is where they're storing all the information on you and me, our text messages, phone calls, internet use, credit card use. They call it electronic pocket litter. Even electronic parking passes are gathered up and scooped up in this system. So everybody is being surveilled. No one is an exception. We are living under a surveillance state. And the first thing we need to do is educate people so they understand that. And when you're educated and you understand something, you start picking up on things you didn't pick up before. You take that education, it broadens your awareness, and you start seeing things you didn't even know were there before. And that's the goal, my goal of getting information out to you, the people. There's nothing better, in my opinion, than a citizen investigative journalist. That's the way America started. The mainstream media is gone. It's run by politically motivated editors. It is controlled, in many cases, by the CIA and elite members who are progressives and want to see the erosion of the U.S. Constitution. More on that in another lecture, of course. Now, the shadow government, I want to stress this. Its effect and its control of Congress. Remember, Congress is the people's only voice. It's the only voice we have in Washington. Again, on Thursday, this coming Thursday night, the 13th at 7 o'clock, I will be getting pretty deep into congressional corruption and how they are manipulated. And frankly, it's quite shocking. It's disconcerting. But people need to know what their congressmen and senators are up to because they vote them into office. And I'm encouraging people to fire the ones who are engaged in corrupt activity. I'll talk about a few of those folks on Thursday night. So Congress is the people's only voice. It has the legal authority, based on the Constitution, to control the CIA through its budget. Congress could cut back the CIA. Congress could eliminate the CIA by blocking its funding. The one problem that the CIA really craftily built into an extrapolation of the National Security Act of 1947, and it's this. The CIA classifies and withholds the documents necessary for Congress to control its budget. Congress can't see them. They're secret. So Congress is paralyzed. It can't stop the CIA. It can't rein back what the CIA is doing. The CIA is out of control. Congressional oversight, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, or HPSI, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, or SISI. These were created to give supposedly oversight over the NSA and the CIA. They are a sham. They don't get the position on these committees because of their past experience. It's bought and paid for. They're put on these committees to make money and coerce money for their particular party. I submitted two very damning memos to both the HPSI and the SISI regarding the CIA's cover-up in my case with evidence, and they silenced them both. Didn't even bother to act on them. I know from associates who've gone in there to the select committees, and they have found that the committees were throwing investigations into a closet, that they were piled almost to the ceiling, things that the Senate Intelligence Committees were supposed to look into, but did not. They just ignored them. It's not about that. It's not about oversight. They don't want to peel the onion layers back in the CIA. It'll mean the end of their career. They don't even go there. So these oversight committees are a sham. Unless we can get back to what I'm calling for, another Senate investigation like the Church Committee of what the CIA, the NSA, and the FBI have been up to for the last 10 years. I'm starting to call for that. Hopefully by the time January gets here, we'll be able to have a petition drive going to have another church-like committee investigating the CIA, the NSA, and the FBI's abuse of power. Congressional oversight? No. The military-industrial complex lobbyists control congressmen and senators by giving them massive contributions or pulling them back. When I talk about Congress tomorrow night, I'll show you how Congress manipulates the MIC, military-industrial complex, into giving them money and contributions by threatening or controlling legislation. They either contribute to their campaigns or they pass legislation against them. It's kind of a legal form of extortion. More about that later when we get into congressional corruption Thursday night. There is a revolving door from Congress to the military-industrial complex. A classic example, James Comey in the FBI. Eventually, the FBI director went out into private industry with the help of Hillary Clinton greasing the skids, because Lockheed Martin was a major contributor to the Clinton Foundation. Comey got in there and got on the board of directors, was given a seat on the board of directors, and made $6 million in 1 year. And that's the revolving door. They go back and forth from the shadow government out to private industry, to Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Booz Allen Hamilton, these other major, massive corporations where they make 6 figures or more. And that's how it works. So, and lastly, and sadly, we'll talk about this on Thursday, the 13th of December, Congress is no longer composed of constitutionalists. It's composed of statesmen. All they want to do is stay in office. All they want to do is protect their incumbency. All they want to do is make themselves rich. And I explain that in detail in the other lecture. They want to make themselves rich off their position. There's very few that are constitutionalists. The only one that comes to mind in prominence is Senator Rand Paul, who, like his dad, has stuck to his constitutional principles consistently without wavering. It was Rand Paul who first made public that there was a secret version of the Patriot Act, which we now know through Edward Snowden was NSA domestic surveillance against us all. So this occurs over, and this is important. We have 2 parties in the United States? Not really. They fight against each other, and they take donations from major military-industrial complexes from both sides. The Republicans take it saying, well, we're going to stop the Democrats, give to us. The Democrats say, we're going to stop the Republicans, give to us. And they both get rich in the process. That's part of the scam. Across party influence, Clinton and Bush Sr. Engaged together in the Iran-Contra drug running scandal. I talk about Bob Woodward's involvement in that on patreon.com/Kevin_Shipp. Bob Woodward is essentially a long-term intelligence operative well before he became a so-called journalist. And I caught him in a direct lie in his book Veil, and I get into that in detail. George W. Bush, Iraq, NSA surveillance, CIA torture, secret prisons, FBI warrantless searches, all happened under George W. Bush. And remember, the guts of the Patriot Act passed by Bush was written 10 years earlier by none other than Democratic Joe Biden. Barack Obama, again, a Democrat, prosecuted leakers, more leakers than any other president in history. Not only engaged in the NSA domestic surveillance program, but increased it. He has actually expanded the CIA drone program and has created what was called a presidential kill list of who was going to be taken out by a drone. And they changed the wording so that it wasn't a confirmed terrorist, but it was someone whose behavior indicated that they may be a terrorist. They were droning them out. And as I mentioned previously in part 3, they were droning wedding parties just to get the one person, killing everyone. So you can see that the shadow government is both parties. It's not one or the other. The 2 parties work off each other intentionally to make themselves rich and to pass legislation, sometimes against the American people and mostly in favor of the military-industrial complex. Hillary Clinton, money from Saudi Arabia, money from Wall Street, the military-industrial complex, i.e. biggest Lockheed Martin, which is essentially the private spying arm of the CIA. Engaged in Libya and the coup in Benghazi to overturn Clinton and Obama's goal was to overturn the Libyan government and place a Muslim Brotherhood government in the Libyan government capital. And it was a de facto assassination of Muammar Gaddafi. The CIA drone sat overhead while the crowd beat Gaddafi to death. They could have intervened anytime, but they didn't. And that's what they do these days. They do third-party assassinations because they supposedly have been forbidden under Gerald Ford from conducting direct assassinations. The root of the CIA is bloody from its beginning, and it's still producing bloody fruit. The Benghazi coup. Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama ran guns to the Syrian rebels, the Free Syrian Army. Those weapons wound up in the hands of guess who? Al-Qaeda, and then subsequently into the hands of ISIS. 2 of our supposed mortal enemies are now carrying guns supplied to them by the Obama administration and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. So Congress, and this is one of the things that frustrates people, and I'll show Thursday the 13th why they do this or how they do this. But congressmen will promise one thing to their constituents to get elected, but when they get in office, they do the exact opposite. They support shadow government deep state wars, secret operations that the American people would never approve of, like in Syria, where the Free Syrian Army massacred an entire village of Christians. They were not moderates at all. They're intending to install a Islamic caliphate government in Syria. And of course, that's what we're not being told. So many congressmen, Dianne Feinstein, for example, approved and supported the NSA domestic surveillance program. And she's in charge of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. I talk in detail about DIFI during my congressional corruption speech coming up on the 13th. So they do the opposite of what they're elected to do because they become part of the shadow government and the deep state, and they get rich doing it. Now let's look at it, and we're getting near the end here. Let's look at the actual constitutional violations, just a few of them that the shadow government has engaged in over the years. And this is just a thumbnail sketch. It would take us a few hours to get into detail into all of them. But let's go through them, because I want you to see that we are no longer under a constitutional government, that the shadow secret government and the military-industrial complex are functioning with impunity outside the Constitution. I mentioned earlier that they control congressional hearings by withholding documents and controlling the testimony. The Warren Commission, looking at the assassination of JFK, guess who they chose to head up the Warren Commission? Alan Dulles, fired by JFK when he said he'd splintered the CIA into 1,000 pieces. Dulles became his mortal enemy because of the slap in the face of being fired. He considered himself the ultimate spy. And it was Alan Dulles who coached the CIA witnesses, selected which witnesses would talk, and when they did, exactly what they would say. The Warren Commission was a sham, and despite the mainstream media's complicity in refraining or refusing to do a real investigative journalism into the JFK assassination, the Warren Commission, and the CIA's role, they cover it up and they parrot the party line, which they were given by the shadow government within days after the death of John F. Kennedy. They're still parroting it today. That's what they do. I talk about the CIA's influence on the mainstream media in Hollywood in another lecture. They block Congress from covert programs. I've talked about that before. They will engage in covert programs without advising Congress. Hillary Clinton was running guns into Libya. The CIA had an annex there where they were arming the rebels. Congress didn't know about. And did you vote for that? Did I vote for that? Did we even know about that? No. So they block Congress from covert programs. They classify and conceal illegal operations. I have a lecture where I show these blacked out documents. Well, when Congress wanted information on the NSA domestic surveillance program, they got a document that was almost completely blocked out. Fast and Furious, Congress was given a document almost completely blacked out. The CIA torture program, Congress was given a document which was almost entirely blacked out. And I show those documents in another speech. They establish covert funding from illegal activity that Congress doesn't know about. Now, some of the congressmen do. The Gang of Eight, they call it, 8 congressmen and senators given exclusive clearances up to the president. They knew about Benghazi. They knew about what was going on, the Gang of Eight in Benghazi, and yet they were never held accountable for that coup and Libya now being in the hands of Al-Qaeda and terrorist groups. So they established covert funding from illegal activity, that is running guns, working with and through the mafia, running drugs to fund programs that Congress wouldn't fund, going all the way back to Operation Gladio, staging false terrorist attacks in Italy to make it look like the Italian government did it. So they gather money from illegal activity. Iran-Contra. Iran-Contra was about making money through illegal activity behind the back of Congress, and certainly behind the back of the American people. Now, there will be some good news eventually here when I finish this. The good news now is you're being informed about what's going on. And I hope the people that you know and love will see this and be informed about what's going on. The more Americans that are informed about these things, the more power that people have, and the less power government has. And that's the way that the founding fathers intended it to be. Excuse me. They have surveilled the Congress and the Senate. They surveilled the Congress. NSA tapped the conversations of congressmen when they were talking to Israel about the Iranian nuclear program. John Brennan, director of the CIA, hacked into the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence computers to look at the torture report and see what they were about to report on the CIA. These are felonies. One was indicted, one was charged, and Mr. Brennan is making six figures now working for the mainstream media. They control the judiciary. FISA court and the state secret privilege, I've mentioned that before. They can shut down any case with impunity, which is exposing what they're doing outside the Constitution. Secret use of Americans' tax dollars with no approval. Is that constitutional? This is a government by we the people, at least it used to be. Now they engage in sometimes bloody covert operations without the knowledge at all of the American people and also Congress. These are constitutional violations. And as I mentioned in my part one of my lecture, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land in the United States. If you or an agency violate the U.S. Constitution, that is a felony or multiple felonies. These people have committed felonies and they have not been held accountable. It is my belief that that day is coming. We just have to keep sounding the alarm. And people, there are only a few of us that take the risks that I do and Bill Binney and others do. And I don't expect people trying to support their families to take this kind of risk because they can destroy your whole life. That's why I do what I do. I do it so you all can be informed, but still stay safe and protect your families. But your knowledge is power. Your knowledge of what the government has become is power. And you can quietly work to bring our Constitution back. All right. We talked enough about surveillance of U.S. citizens. The officials lie under oath with impunity. We've seen Andrew McCabe lie 4 times under oath about the FBI planning spies in the Trump campaign and lying to FISA judges to get NSA surveillance. Here's some other cases. The Director of National Intelligence lied right on camera under oath about the NSA surveillance program, saying they weren't doing it. The CIA, John Brennan lied about hacking into the Senate Select Committee and computers. The NSA has repeatedly lied under oath to Congress. I think it was Keith Alexander, the director of the NSA, claimed that the NSA program, despite its domestic surveillance, had uncovered 50 terrorist attacks. He was asked to go back and get proof, came back and said, well, he couldn't identify the proof. And actually, he couldn't identify that the domestic surveillance program had identified any terrorist attacks. And as a matter of fact, they completely missed the Boston bombing. So he lied under oath. The FBI, as we've seen recently, has lied under oath multiple times. Andrew McCabe, James Comey, and others, three others, have lied under oath to Congress, and they have gotten away with it. They have walked. If a citizen did that, they'd be looking at jail time. Again, one of my goals to see these people indicted for constitutional violations and criminal activity, violations of Title 18 U.S. Legal Code. Some more secret operations involving human rights violations. The CIA did an operation against Augusto Pinochet in Chile, which resulted in the death or torture of 200,000 Chilean citizens. Excuse me, the ones that died were 40,000 Chilean citizens that died in assassination or torture. 200,000 Chilean citizens were and are missing. The Pinochet's hit squads and paramilitaries were paid for and trained by, guess who? The CIA. Silencing whistleblowers. They have completely set up a system, which I'll talk about probably in the next segment, part 5, of how there's an exact system that they use to silence whistleblowers, destroy them, destroy their career, and if necessary, destroy their family. That's what they tried to do to me. In my humble case, they made a miscalculation because I happen to be a person of faith, and I answer to a higher authority. So I did not fear them, and fear is their greatest weapon. Secret prisons, rendition and torture, constitutional violation, snatch and grab, renditions, torture to death, the things that the CIA did. Again, human rights violations. The NDAA, which has the National Defense Authorization Act, which calls for the indefinite detention of American citizens without trial, period. They can just abduct them right off the street, charge them, and put them in jail or Guantanamo with no due process whatsoever. That's in the NDAA. Look it up. National security letters allow the FBI under, guess who was director then? Robert Mueller. Allow the FBI to walk into your employment, claim that they are involved in a terrorist investigation, demand to see your employment records, your financial records, and everything from your supervisor, who is forced to provide it, and then they threaten the supervisor. If he tells you that they've done this, your supervisor will be criminally charged and go to prison. Warrantless searches. Once again, our buddy Robert Mueller engaged in thousands of warrantless searches of Americans' homes under the guise of terrorism. He lied under oath. They asked him how many times the FBI had entered an American's home without a warrant. First, he said 47. They brought more evidence. I think they got him up to 2,000. They brought more evidence after he lied a second time, told him, no, we've got evidence of 4,000. And then finally, if you can imagine this, they said, Director Mueller, you're the head of the FBI. I want you to tell us how many times the FBI has entered an American's home under the Patriot Act without a warrant. Director Mueller's response was, shockingly, I don't remember. You don't remember how many times you violated the Constitution, the Fourth Amendment, how many times you committed a felony or your subordinates committed a felony, and you don't remember. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the shadow government. They get away with this because of their unbridled power, and they are not elected officials. And the time has come for them to be exposed. I talked about the drone assassination program and the presidential kill list. A lot of people don't know when George W. Bush came out and declared that we were involved in a war on terror, that did something very significant. It kicked in the continuation of government, continuity of government program, which allows the government, the executive branch, to suspend the Constitution at any time and declare a state of emergency. Since 9/11, the continuity of government, or COG, has been in place, and it is still in place. The Constitution, after the declaration of state of emergency, can be suspended. So what does the shadow government do? We have George Tenet here, who is the one who sealed my case and threatened me and my family, my wife and kids even, with prison if we talked about the evidence. Good old George Tenet provided the false intelligence that led to the Iraq War, the death of 500,000 Iraqi children, 2,500 U.S. troops, and 200,000 U.S. troops being either badly injured physically or coming home with PTSD, with a suicide rate of about 6,000 a month when they return. So what do they do for this shady individual, and perhaps this, you could say this criminal? Well, George W. Bush gives him the Presidential Medal of Honor for completely ruining the Middle East, destabilizing the Middle East, empowering Iran, and leading American men and women, soldiers, to their deaths. And what does he get? He gets a medal. It's worth noting here that the CIA was the only federal agency that's withheld what it knew about the 9/11 attacks before they happened. It refused to provide any information to the committee, 9/11 Commission. It wouldn't provide any information. Perhaps that's because two of the alleged hijackers were CIA informants. The CIA knew about them. The CIA knew they were in the country illegally. The CIA knew they were taking flight lessons, and didn't tell the FBI or even the White House what it knew. And there's a lot more dirt there. We've talked about it in one episode of Patreon, and we're going to get into it in greater detail because it's a difficult psychological line for people to cross, that their government would do such a thing, but the evidence is overwhelming. Torture program, rendition of secret prisons. It was George Tenet that invoked the state secrets privilege to seal cases against him and the CIA more than any other CIA director in history. Those are the ones we know about. For example, my case when they invoked the state secret privilege to seal the evidence is not even reported in legal records. So there are more cases where the CIA and the NSA have shut down cases against them using the state secrets privilege, and they are not even on record. Guess who was his chief of staff at the time he was doing this? Guess who? John Brennan, who later became one of the most corrupt. They're all corrupt, with the exception maybe of William Colby, who actually I admire. He was eventually murdered. We'll talk about him on another program. He's probably the only good director that the agency has ever had. And of course, look what happened to him. Torture, drones, spying on the Senate, using the privilege, and on and on and on it goes. So this is the end of this Part 4 installment of our expose on the shadow government. You can reach me. I go in my book, I signed For the Love of Freedom. You can find me at fortheloveoffreedom.net on the web, fortheloveoffreedom.net. You'll see the documents that I have revealed, exposing wide open the CIA's cover-up. Every Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on patreon.com, Kevin_Shipp. We dig deep into the shadow government, corruption in Congress, and all the parts of oversight that should be done in Washington. We dig into that on that program, and we're building a community of patriots, constitutionalists, and just good people. It's exciting. You can find me on Facebook from the Company of Shadows, or you can catch me on Twitter at Kevin_Shipp. Then you can start from there. I put out tweets pretty much daily about illegal surveillance, the activities of the NSA, the CIA, and others. So you can go to Twitter and catch my updates pretty regularly. So that's it for this evening and for this portion of the Shadow Government Expose, Part 4. I thank you all for spending time with me again. And this is Kevin Shipp coming to you from the Ascent Studio, somewhere deep in the woods in the southern United States. Merry Christmas to everyone that's out there, and we will see you next time.